Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for the invitation, and sorry for not being there in person. So this is a joint work with my PhD student from Grenoble, Mohamed Aboudaya, and Steven Vandervel from Vrije Universiteit Brussels, and his PhD student, Marco Feliciangeli. So in fact, there are two papers, and I'll be presenting the talk will actually be based on these two papers that are really working papers and work in progress. So we're still experimenting and polishing everything. So any feedback, any ideas are very, very welcome. And if you don't understand something, so don't hesitate to interrupt me. I'll be happy to answer, and I hope anyone can follow and you don't get lost. So the two working papers are the first one with Marco and Steven, can actually unfair tontines be optimal? And there we will look at a very simple tontine, just a one period investment, and investigate one particular way to share money. And then I'll explain what a tontine and why a sharing rule is important in the tontine. We'll see an alternative tontine and explain why in a competitive market, if you have no social planner, no regulation, and you just say, okay, anyone can open a tontine, then there is actually only one tontine that will survive. And this is the tontine with the Sabine rule, the so-called Sabine rule that I will explain afterwards. And one thing in the tontine, and I'll be basing my talk also on a tontine that exists in France, and there are not so many in France, and so many in the world, in fact. As far as I know, tontines are still quite rare products. And even though I don't understand why, and I will try to convince you that these are really interesting products for investment, for wealth management, for preparing for your retirement. So hoping that, to convince you to push the industry to actually issue tontines, and or even depending on how the regulation is in your country, then it could also be issued by companies or by fund managers. So there are many ways that a tontine can be issued, and I'll explain why. And because of this lack of guarantees, this is actually a product that's very easy to manage from the issuer's perspective. And but there is one thing that when you enter in a tontine, it's very opaque, and there's a lot of problem in terms of information. The person who managed the tontine has a lot of information, but the people who are inside the tontine don't have the same information. In general, they don't know who has already subscribed the contract. And this will, so depending who are the clients, who are the participants in the contract, it will affect them. And so that's what I mean by opacity of a tontine, is when you enter in such contract, you depend also on others who you don't know. And you depend in a way that you are actually protected. So you will not know their name. You will not, they are anonymous, and they will stay anonymous. And so there is a loss of utility coming from this opacity in the contract. And I'll explain why, and why also a smart contract could be used to solve this problem. So let me explain what a one-period tontine is, and then it will be clearer what I'm talking about. So a tontine, if you have never heard about it, is an investment, so a collective investment, where every participant enters with an initial contribution. So you decide how much you want to contribute. You put this money in a fund. You can even, depending how the tontine is designed, but you can also imagine that every participant decides how they want to invest their contribution. So you choose how much you contribute, how you want to invest it. And if you survive at the maturity, you get your investment back. So you won't lose anything. It's like as if you invest by yourself, except that if you survive, you will also get whatever, whoever is dead has left money in the pool, and this money will be shared among the survivors. So your money is not going to get you only what you have invested, but also this additional money that will come from as a mortality credit, as money that comes from the people who died during the maturity, before the maturity of the tontine. So turns out that this type of contract, for instance, in France, can only be regulated by the regulation of insurance companies and can only be issued by an insurance company. But this is already something strange because a tontine does not have any guarantee. So there is no risk. It's not like you're not transferring any risk to the issuer of the tontine. So if the insurance company decides to do a tontine, you will start to collect money, invest this money according to the wish of all these people. And then at the end, if nobody dies, everybody gets back his share of his investment. And if some people die, then the money that has been invested by this person will be just shared among all the survivors. So you need a sharing rule, you need a process to share the money at the end, but you really have no risk for the person who managed the tontine, because the only thing you do is collecting the money, counting who's alive at the end, and distributing back the money from the dead people to people who are still alive. You don't need an underwriting process, so anyone is free to enter in this, and there is no reason why there should be an underwriting process, because there's no risk in some sense, and it's, yeah. And because there's no mortality risk, there's no guarantee. You don't know the only guarantee that you hope is that the person who's managing the tontine is not a crook and will give back money that you invested. So there is no Ponzi scheme. There is no, he's not going to steal the money. He's going to report the death honestly. So you need kind of this supervision that the person who's managing the tontine is doing it in an honest way, but you don't need to manage the risk that he's taking, because he's not taking any risk and he's not taking any mortality risk in particular. So there is no capital requirement, no guarantees. And as a result, tontines can be issued at very, very low cost. And the other thing is you keep the control on your own investment, at least while you're alive. And so as long as you only feel of preparing your retirement, and this was one of the goal Agostino was presenting yesterday, as one of the biggest goal. If your biggest goal is to prepare for retirement, what you want is to have money at your retirement to maximize this amount of money. And if you are not focused on leaving money after you die, then in fact, this money is much better in the tontine than just in a regular fund. So this is why it should be attractive to anyone. And so you can formalize a little bit, it's mathematically, but it really stays the same. A payout for the tontine is your personal investment and the way you invest it, plus
Carole?
a mortality credit that comes from the death.
So we have a question from the audience. Is it okay?
Yes.
Hi, Carole. It's Natalie here. So
Hi,
I was
nice
just
to see you.
I was just wondering about the tontine. Is there an age limit? Could I invest as a 20-year-old, hoping that all the others in the pool are old and I'm the only survivor, for example? Or are there any restrictions in that way?
In fact, to me, yes, you can. And then why would you not be able? Because in fact, when you enter in a pool, it just depends on how the sharing rule at the end. So I'm going to discuss this sharing rule. So you point out something very important is that if everybody is not the same in the pool, then we should not share equally. So it's clear that the 20-year-old that enters in the tontine is actually hoping to say, of course, I will be alive in 10 years, and hoping that a lot of people in the pool will be dead so that he can get actually some additional investments. And so in some sense, this 20-year-old is not taking risk or very little risk, and as a result, should not get a high proportion of the money from the dead people. Whereas if you're 70-year-old and you decide to enter in the tontine with a 10-year maturity, you're playing a much bigger risk. And so if you're alive in 10 years, you should actually get much more as a proportion than this person who is only 20-year-old. So at the end, the tontine I will design is actually open for heterogeneous people. So it's not restricted of specific people with specific age. It's really should be open to anyone. And it will actually, everybody will benefit from the fact that the more, the better. The more people you have, even if they are young, they will actually smooth the mortality and will help getting very low volatility. And so it will increase the utility you get out of the payment of the tontine. So the proposition I have here is just has been explained in words before. If you assume the mortality credit, so you find a way to share the money in a where everybody gets a positive part. So that means you really say, okay, you get back your investment and you share the mortality credit. There are other tontines that have been also discussed where it's much more intergenerational risk sharing, where some people can get less than what they invest, but then it's not clear that they want to enter in the tontine in the first place. Whereas the tontine I'm actually designing and then the one I work with are really tontines that anyone who has no bequest motive should be interested, because the payout of a tontine strictly dominates the payout of a personal investment in the sense of first order stochastic dominance. So there's really no, it's a strict dominance. Anybody with increasing preferences would prefer the tontine again over a regular investment. So how does it work? If we are all identical, that's a simple case, in fact. And this is same age, same gender, same initial contributions. We all put exactly $100 in the pool. We are all the same age, all the same gender. And then it's very clear. What do? We get our investment back. So to make it simple, I'm actually assuming it's just invested in risk-free rate. And so everybody has the same amount at the end, but you could imagine that this C is actually personalized and that everybody has a different investment, so that it's like a CI at the end. And you would sum over the, so everybody would get back his CI. And then you would look at how much money is left by the people who died. So ND is the number of deaths. So NDC is the amount of money I have to share. NS is the number of people who survive. I just share equally. So I divide the amount of money that has been left by the dead participants divided by the number of survivors. Now, the more interesting case, of course, is the heterogeneous case, because in general, and even the tontine that exists in France, it's completely opaque. You don't know who's in there, but there is no restriction. So they enroll anyone. And I'm quite sure there are old people. I know somebody who has enrolled his kid, in fact, in the tontine from my school. And then I found this was a funny idea, but also a very reasonable idea. The way he has thought about it is that this is a way to give money to your kid and say, okay, you're 10-year-old today. You need your money maybe when you're 20 to study. I'm giving this money invested in a tontine, and you'll get it if you're alive in 10 years. So you'll get the payment from the tontine, and you'll get more if people are surviving, if some people are dead in the tontine, which of course you hope, but this is like a bet against or for the death of other people. And so in this case, like when you enroll a young kid, like there's a very high chance that he will be alive in 10 years. And he will also get not so big mortality credit, but he will get some mortality credit, because what I'm assuming is that everyone, even if you have a young age, you'll get a kappa I, which is the coefficient that will determine the sharing rule, that is positive. And so what you get is like everybody gets a coefficient that depends on his mortality, on his characteristic, whether it's a male, a female, and you would get paid. So this amount of money, sum of CJ for J belonging to D, is actually the amount of money that is left to be shared. And how much you get is your kappa compared to all the survivors, whether you have a big kappa, so that means actually you take a big risk, then you have a high proportion of this amount of money. If you have a small kappa, you will get a small proportion of this amount of money. And so this is the mechanism. And so the problem that we are looking at is how to choose this kappa to make it fair, and in such a way that you're not too impacted by the fact that the tontine can maybe be composed of a lot of young people, or maybe a lot of old people, or a mix. So what you want is to find this kappa I such that the composition of the tontine in terms of who are the members who sign and participate does not matter. And so that's, I will call it as robust to heterogeneity in mortality. So I don't care the profile of the others, they have different mortality profiles, but what I want is to find a rule that whether everyone is actually my age or everyone has different age, then the kappa I should be such that I get the same, so that I don't care about the composition. So this is the Sabin rule, and this is one of the big properties we found from the Sabin rule, is going to be able to do that. And then my last part of the talk will be on how to offer a fully transparent tontine using a smart contract. So what are the contributions? First, we characterize this rule such that it's the only sharing rule that is robust to heterogeneity in mortality. So that means it's a kappa I such that whether I'm pooled with people of my age, my gender, is exactly the same amount of money I would get if I'm pooled with others, because the kappa I just reflect the risk I'm taking. So we studied this rule, and this has a really nice property, but then we also looked at what are the problems with these rules. And in particular, this rule will not give you equal utility. So we propose to have a new sharing rule where every participant is equally happy in terms of utility. But then the problem is this rule with equally happy participants can be applied only if you have a mandatory enrollment in the tontine. So this could be applied by government, for instance. Like government, in some sense, for pension, do run a huge tontine because they collect money from everybody's salary, put it in a huge pot, and then redistribute it among the survivors. So this is kind of running a tontine. And there they could have a distribution rule that would be based on equal utility, for instance. But it's not, what we show is that if the market is competitive and there's no mandatory enrollment, then no one wants to enter in our equal utility tontine. Everybody wants the Sabin rule in any case. And so, and finally, I'll propose how to deal with the opacity of the tontine if you don't want to, because there's still factors that influence the output. So I'm building on a huge literature review, but that has kind of, it's kind of recent. There's a few papers that appeared, like a very old paper and a few papers on following this one, which is about the actuarial note. And to me, it's really the ancestor of the tontine, because it was just a way to, you give $1 to a company, an insurance company, and it gives you a bit more if you're alive. It's like the one period life annuity. So if you're alive in 10 years, you get more, but it's guaranteed amount. So this is like an insurance company that gives it to you. It's based on the life tables, but the insurance company guarantees that if you invest 1 today, you'll get 1.2 in 20 years, for instance. And so this is based on the risk they take, and they guarantee that you will get this 1.2. And there are like a few papers on pooled annuity funds. And so this is the idea of pooling the money and investing collectively. And the papers I will mostly use are the papers of Sabin, and I will refer to Sabin rule, which is the one that is clearly explained in the paper of Sabine 2010 and has been discussed a bit more in further papers. There's also a lot of literature has been written by Moshe Milevsky here in Toronto, and is one of the big researchers in Toronto. He has been extremely active on Tontines. He has written a book, in fact, recently in open access. So this is a book for the industry to try to develop Tontines, and actually managed to be involved, or I don't know if he forced the company, if the company got to listen to his talks. I don't know exactly the story, but there is one company in Canada that launched the Tontine in September 2022. So relatively recent, The Guardian. And so there is a Tontine also in Canada. There's a lot of work from Catherine Donnelly and her co-authors, some from Mike Sherris, some recent work also from Michel Denuit and Christian Robert, a bit more technical on how to risk share. This is more like in the theory, to use the conditional expectation as a way to share risk when you share among multiple people, and they apply it in the context of Tontine. But this rule, for instance, does not have the same property as the Sabine rule. So it suffers from, it's like an alternative rule, but it's not having the same property as the Sabine rule. And then there's a lot of papers from Anchen and co-authors who work on more in a dynamic setting and more like income tontines, where you'll have money spread over time. Whereas I'm really going to focus on the one period tontine, trying to understand this one period setting, which is not so unrealistic because the French contract is a one period tontine. So the idea of doing multi-periods or continuous payments or monthly payments is also interesting, but this is actually beyond what's offered currently in France. So I thought I could focus on the one period tontine to understand it. And discuss, so, and understand, in fact, if you understand well what happens in the sharing rule in the one period tontine, then this type of sharing rule can be generalized in the multi-period, in fact. And you could also think about subscribing a tontine with each age. And so that's actually what's proposed the company in France is to do. When you sign with them, they say you have to choose the maturity of your tontine, but you can invest your money and spread it over several tontines. So they will explain you to try to get equal amount of money every year to invest differently in the 10-year tontine, 11-year tontine, 12-year tontine. And so then you can get every year a payment. So there's also tax incentive because there's a maximum you can get every year that is not taxable. So they also play with that to kind of spread the money over different tontines. But at the end, it's really a one period tontine. And so you need to have a sharing rule over this one period. The first assumption, which is very natural and is sometimes even by regulation. So in the French regulation, this is mandatory to have the sharing rule at the end to be proportional to your invested amount. So somebody who invests twice as much should just get twice as much, at least in terms of participation. So this kappa I that determines how much you get at the end will be proportional to your investment. If you invest twice as much, you'll get twice as much. It's really just proportional. So everything that I will discuss then is per unit of investment, because instead of looking at VI, I can look at VI over CI, and I'm looking at the return of $1 in the tontine. What else do I assume? I'm also assuming that the kappa I must be decreasing with the survival probability. And so this is to address the comment of Natalie. Indeed, if you want the 20-year-old and the 80-year-old to be in the same tontine, you really need to make it fair for them, because the 20-year-old is taking very low risk, whereas the 80-year-old take a much higher risk. And so you need this decreasing function of the survival probability. The survival probability is small for the 80-year-old. He must actually get a very high part of the amount of money left by the dead people if he survives. if he survives, and so then the amount of money that is left to be shared. One property that so far has been actually most of the literature, or almost all the literature on the topic for tontines, is focused on finding ways to share money in an actuarial fair way. So what it means actually fair, it means that it's fair in expectation. On average, what you pay in the tontine is what you get at the end. So if you have a higher probability of dying, you should get, and so to get 0, you should get a higher payoff if you survive, just to balance the fact that you will get 0 with a higher probability. And so if you enforce this, you get, in fact, naturally a sharing rule that is based on this ratio of probability to die over the probability to survive. And this is this ratio that we actually call Sabin rule. And this is a way to say that every person, so the 20-year-old, I'm going to look at the probability has to die between today and the maturity of the tontine, divided to probability to survive. And I will do the same with the 80-year-old. So you can see that this ratio, in fact, will be decreasing with PI, which is what you want. What are the advantages of this rule? Is first, it's not, strictly speaking, if you have a finite number of participants, it's not actually fair. So there is a small bias, but this bias is actually very small. And if you have more than 100 participants, you can neglect it. And so in the limits, when you have a large enough number of participants, the tontine will mimic the one period life annuity. And so if we look back at the proposal of Yari, which was you invest one, I guarantee like from to an insurance company, and then he guarantees some payment in case you're alive, like in the life annuity business. Here, it's not guaranteed, but on average, that's what you will get, in fact. So this is something that mimics the one period life annuity, but without a guarantee. So if the realized mortality, and that's the key behind the tontine, is that this PI that I use here are the mortality that I'm estimating today for the pool in 10 years, like for each person in the pool in 10 years. And of course, these estimates can be a little bit biased, and then you won't get exactly, it won't be exactly the amount of money that you would hope for, but at least there is no guarantee. So you would just get, if the realized mortality is the same as the planned mortality, exactly what you expected. And if it's different, you will get a little bit less or a little bit more. And typically with longevity risk, you will get a little bit less. People stand to stay more alive than longer, then you will get a little bit less. And the mortality credit that you've estimated at the beginning will be a little bit smaller. But again, even if the mortality credit is smaller, it doesn't mean that the tontine is not interesting. It just means that you get your investment plus an additional payment that will be a bit smaller. But you still have this dominance, whatever happens on the mortality. The second advantage, and this is why I think this rule is extremely strong, and that's also why it has this property of being the only one tontine that survives in that exists in a competitive market, is the fact that if you have an heterogeneous tontine and you use the Sabin sharing rule, then asymptotically you would get the same. If you look at the difference between what you get in the heterogeneous tontine and what you get in a single cohort tontine, which just means a fake tontine where everybody would be the same as you. In fact, these two converge almost surely to 0. So you have asymptotically the same payout as in a single cohort tontine. And so that makes you, in fact, strongly in favor of this Sabin sharing rule, It's the only sharing rule with this property. So if you like this property, you have no choice. You must actually choose the kappa I proportional to this qi over pi. So you just give qi over pi to everyone. This gives you a coefficient for everyone. And then your part of the investment will be your kappa I divided by the sum of the others. So this determines your sharing rule. What are the problems? The problems are more financial problems. So now Sabine rule is something that is good in expectation. On average, it's fair on average, but it's not fair in terms of variance. For instance, the variance of the old people is higher than the variance of the young people. So we developed some approximation for the variance and we computed in the paper. And we did that for using the Belgian male life table and computed this qi over pi for people between 65 to 74. So here in the table, I just put 65, 67, 69, 71, and 73. These are 5 age, but in fact, we have 10 groups in the Tontine. It's just that it was a too long table. And you could see, for instance, that this kappa I is 5.7. And I put it as a percentage. So this would be, you have like 100 points to distribute among the different people. And this is like 5.7 for somebody age 65. So compared to 3 times bigger for somebody age 75, for instance. Just like the person who's 10 years later will receive 3 times more in terms of percentage. For if there is one person dying, then this amount of money will be shared proportional to 15 for somebody age like 14.4 for somebody age 73 and proportional to 5.7 for somebody age 65. So this gives you more or less the ratio that you will get already between 65 and 73. And this ratio really just go very strong, where it's like 1 for people age 20 to 47 for somebody age 80. Just because when you take a huge risk, you will get a huge part of the death benefit at the end to make the tontine fair. So we estimated the average, and then on average, you always get your investment back. So this is actually fair if you have enough people in each group. So here, 100 people in each group, it's like a tontine with 1,000 people. It's enough to be actually fair. And it's not exactly 1, it's actually 1.00001 or 0.9999. But at first approximation, it's actually 1. But one thing that is very striking is that the standard deviation, the volatility of your payout, if you're young, is much lower than if you're old. And this, if you think about the global volatility, it's very intuitive, because the person who's very old has a small probability to get a high payment. So you could still think, okay, there's a very high volatility. But if you do it conditionally upon survival, even conditionally upon survival, you see that the person who's young has actually a very low, has a lower volatility than the person that is old. So you still have this unfairness in some sense in volatility, so that somebody risk averse should actually prefer differently, have a different feeling about the tontine, depending if you're having this volatility or this volatility. So the higher the volatility, so the lower is your utility. So this, we did it for the CRA and exponential utility and found similar result, but this is not surprising. As soon as you have a volatility that increases, any utility that's concave will actually lead to a loss in utility. And so what we decided is to try to look at what would be a tontine, like what would be the sharing rule for a tontine where everybody has the same utility. And so the utility per unit invested, so that's why I just divide by how much you invest in the tontine. I assume it's just the same for person I, person J, and this is for everyone. And this value is just U bar is just the average of all values. And I'm trying to look at what are the kappa I that would minimize the distance to this average, in the sense that ideally I just want it to be 0, that everybody gets U bar. But in fact, sometimes you cannot achieve the kappa I all positive, and you will get boundary solution like kappa I equal to 0 would be one of the solution. And so that would mean that there is a cohort of people who, if they subscribe in the tontine, they are sure to not get any mortality credit. So the question then is like, okay, why would they join the Ecole utility tontine? Because if they stay out, they will get their investment if they're alive, and if they are dead, they can give their investment to their family or do whatever they want with it. So there is no incentive for these people to actually join the tontine. So when kappa I goes to 0, it's actually not a good solution, because it actually means you cannot find equal utility. And it also means that the tranches of people who are concerned with this kappa I equal to 0 don't want to subscribe to the tontine. So this is an illustration where you see a big crossing point here. There's no problem between age 70 and age 71. And you will find a point where a way to share the money between these two classes of age, such that the two utility will be equal. But if you take two age groups that are more different, it will make it more difficult to actually find a kappa I such that their utility is equal. And that's illustrated, in fact, in this case, where if you want to pull two age groups, one age 60 and one age 70, one age 80. If you want to pull these two groups, there's too much difference and you cannot find a kappa. So one of the guy has to get 0, whereas the other guy gets 100% of the death benefits. So this is not acceptable. And so what we did is to constrain the utility tontine a bit more, to say, okay, in fact, the kappa from Sabine are good, and we just want to not deviate too much, but we'll deviate a little bit to increase the utility of people who have a low utility, and to decrease the one that have a high utility, to make it more equal in utility. And so if you choose A and B, but you keep them positive, then you are sure that everyone has is still optimal for everyone to join the tontine. And it's a tontine that is better in terms of risk. The risk is more evenly spread among the people, and they get the same volatility of their payout. So this is what achieved this constrained utility tontine. However, it cannot be offered in a competitive market in which there is a tontine with the Sabine rule that is also available. So let me try to explain the intuition is that you have a tontine that has the property that it's actually, if you join this Sabine tontine with the Sabine rule, you don't care about the mortality heterogeneity. If there are young people, old people, in fact, what you get at the end will asymptotically be the same if you have enough people in the pool, as if you are in a single cohort tontine where everybody has the same age and gender than you. But if you have another tontine, and for instance, the equal utility tontine, but any sharing rule that is not the Sabine tontine has this problem, is that there is some subsidization. So if you have the young, for instance, who subsidize the old, and you have the Sabine tontine where they can get as much as if they are pooled only with young people, then they will actually prefer to go to the Sabine tontine than going to the other tontine. And so all the young people will leave. And this will just push the age up until the time where in the constrained utility tontine, you actually get only one class of age, and you're back to the fact that it's a single cohort tontine. And when you have a single cohort tontine, all sharing rules are all equal, in fact. So you get back to the Sabine tontine, in fact. So at the end, all participants will choose the Sabine tontine. So or are indifferent to be in the sub tontine, in the sense that if they stay in the tontine, everybody will leave. Or on another way to see it is like the only people who will subscribe this particular tontine are people from their age. Because at equilibrium, then others will be better off in the Sabine tontine. So Sabine tontine suffers from some unfairness, but nevertheless, without the external intervention, the mandatory way, like a regulator that imposes mandatory subscription, then no choice, the other tontines cannot exist. So any other ways of sharing in a tontine is not appropriate. The second part, and then I don't have that much time, so I won't say too much on this, but just to give you an idea of it, is what we did with my student in Grenoble, and he's passionate about cryptocurrency and smart contract. And so he said, okay, tontines can be offered in a smart contract. And this would solve a lot of problems. And one problem is when you subscribe to a tontine, and this is the problem with this company in France and any company who offered tontines, they don't give you how many participants there is in the tontine. And it would be different if there are 10 people, because you will get a very high volatility of your payout at the end, or if there's 10,000 people. They don't tell you the individual characteristic. You don't know the age, the investments. And even in France, and this I find it's really bad, is you don't know the sharing rule in advance. So the sharing rule will be decided the year of the maturity by a committee that is in the board of the company and should be approved by the regulator. But there is no rule, there is no table, there is no a priori rule that determines like how it's solved at the end. And so this is what is the reality of tontine. And what we did is trying to understand what is the effect and what's the value, the loss that you have when you subscribe to a tontine and you don't have access to this information. And so we looked at if you survive, the quantity that we analyze is the certainty equivalent. If you survive, so conditional on being alive, how much cash would I like to have that would replace the payout I would get from the tontine, assuming I know the composition and so on. So this gives me a certainty equivalent, and that's the conditional certainty equivalent. This amount of cash that is, I'm indifferent between getting this cash or getting the payout of the tontine if I survive. And this is very linked, in fact, with the one period life annuity, where if it's the Sabine rule and there are infinitely many people, you would actually just get the cash of a one period life annuity. And I look at the utility loss. So I use the measure that was proposed in Barrio and Scandolo in 2015, where you have an uncertainty set with all possible values for the number of participants. So you have some uncertainty on it. So in France, for instance, you know that there's at least 200 participants, or they don't have the right to run the tontine. So N is bigger than 200. You have uncertainty on the mortality across the participants. So it gives me a lot of different age and gender of the tontine. And you have also how much people invest in the tontine can also affect, in fact, the variance, and thus it will also affect the utility you get at the end. And so you have your best estimate when the condition for the tontine that exists, you're going to enroll in the tontine, and all the condition in the tontine, it's a very high number of participants. People are all your age, or maybe are all older, and you think this is best for you. And they have all invested one, and you want to invest 100, and you just feel, okay, then this is my optimal tontine, and this is the tontine that would maximize my certainty equivalent. But the truth is that you actually ignore all of this. And so if you're conservative, you will actually look at what's the minimum certainty equivalent you have if you have uncertainty on all this. And so you can measure the percentage uncertainty. And this is what we use to measure which information is most important in the tontine. So we did an example with very unrealistic tontine with people from age 25, who are actually the ones that are the most difficult to convince to invest in the tontine. because these people from 25, they start to have kids and they start to see, oh, but my kids might need money. I might need money in 10 years. I don't want to enter in this. And there are people from age 65, 60 who are thinking of retirement. And then for them, it's actually more interesting to, more easy, I would think, easier to convince. When your kids are old enough, they have a job, they have an income, you need to think about yourself, about your retirement. And a tontine is actually a good thing for you. And so if you think about them and you look at these people and 100 people from age 25, 100 people from age 70, they invest together. And what they would get, and this will also answer the question of Natalie at the end, no interest rate. So this is very simple. You put 1 in there and you get 1 if you survive, plus your share of the people who died. And you see that the person who's 25 will just get an additional 1%. So he's taking very low risk, but he's getting a very low return in some sense on the tontine. The person age 70, if he survives until age 80, then he will get actually 37% return on his investment. So he will receive actually much more than the person. So this is on average that what they would get. An heterogeneous one or an homogeneous one would actually lead to the same numbers because of this rule of mortality. So we've looked at the effect of the number of people in the tontine. And when the number increase, very quickly, it decreases dramatically the percentage loss that you can make. And it's like 0.1% loss on your certainty equivalent. It's not it's not anymore like for 300, 400 people, you just feel there's no effect on the on your payout to have more people would not matter. One thing that could matter is if everyone in tontine invests 1 and you have 1 participant very rich that invests much more. Because the effect is, so this is what you would get if everybody invests the same. And if you have 1 guy who invests more, you get to the blue line. So this is the unfortunate, this is, so this case here, I don't know if you see my mouse, but this is, wait, is it this? So this blue line is the effect of having this 1 person coming with a very big investment. It actually decreases the utility for everyone by adding actually volatility to the payments. And this person will get a much lower utility than if he was in a tontine where everybody would invest the same. So just because he invests a lot and the others investing very little, he won't get a high return on what he invested. So he's taking a lot of risk, also additional risk in some sense, although you have still the proportional sharing role. We also looked at how much you would lose if everyone invests 1 except 1 guy who invests C, and C is bigger and gets bigger and bigger. And you see that then you can get 3-4%, like it depends how far you go. But if you have 1 person investing 1,000 times more, there will be almost 3.5% loss. So this starts to be significant, in fact. So the investment in the tontine could have a negative effect on the return. So conclusion, what we found is that if you have enough people, no impact. If there's no huge difference in investment, so if you keep everybody investing almost the same amount, then a little bit of heterogeneity is negligible. It really does not impact your return. And if the Sabin rule is used, heterogeneity in mortality is negligible. But the problem is you don't know if this is the case when you subscribe in a tontine. So if you want to know this, you could actually go for a smart contract. And there's a way to provide full transparency of who is in the tontine, who has invested in there, what are their age, and so on, but in a fully anonymous way. And without someone, like in a fully decentralized way. So there is no insurance company in the middle. There's nobody collecting. It's just a software that has been programmed at the beginning and executing a self-executing smart contract. So you need to launch it. So you need a developer to launch the contract. But once people enroll in it, then it just lives by itself. So for that, you would need a blockchain with consensus mechanism. You need a wallet to store the smart contract. You need some units in which payments can be done. And this needs to be linked to cryptocurrency. It needs to be possible to put this money in a smart contract and in a smart wallet. And so you could think about the new type of currencies like these central bank digital currencies that are under development these days, like among many countries. So this is still very hypothetical, but the nice part is that for the subscriber's perspective, it will only interact with the software, and the software has to be programmed so that it takes the investment amount, it does something with it, which has been pre-decided. And in 10 years, it will perform. So you connect to this decentralized application. You perform the KYC, know your customer procedure. So you show who you are. So the software will analyze your age, your gender. So you will have this information. You input the investment amount that you want to put, and this needs to be in digital currency. You need to say, what do you want to do with this digital currency to store in an account? There's some ways to get some interest also in the digital world. And you wait until the maturity of the tontine. And then you check, you have a mechanism where the software, again, the smart contract will decide and perform the know your customer procedure without the intervention of a human in there. And depending on the result of this know your customer procedure, you will actually get back your money after the identity verification of everyone is done. So you need some window of time where you have the right to say, I'm still alive, I need my share of the tontine, and then the money can be shared again. So this type of smart tontine, so my co-author Mohammed is more knowledgeable on how to do it really in practice. And he actually wrote the Solidity code that would need called tontine to run. And this is a way to make the tontine completely transparent, because what's in the blockchain is immutable and is like everybody has access to this information. So it's fully transparent. Everybody knows how many people have subscribed, what are their characteristics, and you could have rules to make sure that this is fair. First 10 people enroll without any underwriting constraints. So, and then if there are too few people, you have to decide to just cancel the tontine. And if you have people coming to incorporate new people, you have to make sure that they don't invest too much. And so you need to have this way to restrict the investment in the tontine in a way so that one person join, it reduces the volatility of the tontine, makes it better for everyone, but you don't add too much heterogeneity. So you can have a mechanism that really help like completely smooth the problems that I raised so far. So let me conclude. These tontines are attractive. I hope to see more in the future. And that these smart contracts might be a way to help to design transparent tontine. But this means working with digital currencies, and I'm still not sure how many people are willing to do that, even if it's maybe the future of finance. We will see in 10 years or 20 years whether it has been the future or not. So thanks everyone. If you want to get these working papers, don't hesitate to contact me. I'll be happy to send them to you. But they are really work in progress working papers for now. So thanks a lot.